Welcome back to Visual Design for Multimedia. Today we're going to go over the big world, but just kind of an introduction of effects and presets that are inside of After Effects. You can think of these as sort of like Photoshop filters, but the presets are actually kind of cool. They're like these preset animations that then you can adapt and change. So we're going to start off with some of the effects, and then we're going to move into some of the more advanced presets, particularly some of the character presets, the type animation presets, since our last lesson was all about how to animate type using the little animate drop-down menu. The presets actually take advantage of that animate drop-down menu, but kind of do it all automatically. That being said, always use your effects with a grain of salt. It's really easy to spot an effect if you're an avid After Effects user. So you don't want to just be that person that uses an effect straight out of the box, doesn't change it at all. Think of these as starting points or foundations for you to adapt it into something that you need, or at least for you to kind of like learn how to do it manually down the road. So I have created a new composition. This is just some sample text. I put in the howdy partner here. So right off the bat, up here under effects, if I choose a particular layer in my composition, if I come up to effects, you'll see there's all these great things in here. And there's so much in here, we're only going to start to scratch the surface. There's audio effects, there's 3D elements if you bring in 3D models into After Effects. Let's start off by looking at blurs. I often find myself using like a motion blur or a Gaussian blur in combination with a kind of a type motion graphics intro element. So if I use Gaussian blur and I bring that in, as soon as I click on that, you'll notice my effects window pops up. So I have kind of my project window, which has all my assets, but just right next to it is my effects control window. So under here, Gaussian blur, it's just like Gaussian blur in Photoshop. If I unfold the blurriness, you can see that I can blur out the type, right? And I don't have to just go 0 to 50. I could type in like 100 and go even more and really blur it out if I want to. There's blur dimensions, so I can control whether it blurs horizontally and vertically or just horizontally. So if I do that, you'll see it's kind of only blurring to the right and left. I'll type in a higher number. There you go. You can see how it's just being kind of like smeared to the horizontal versus if I switch that to vertical, then it's being blurred vertically versus both. Then I get like a nice soft uniform. But good to know, right? Because sometimes you want an effect that only goes in a certain direction. I haven't tried this repeat edge pixels. Oh, that's interesting. I'm not exactly sure what that's for, but I'm sure there's a reason for it down the road. So, very easy. Now that I've applied an effect to it, if I unfold my layer down here, you'll notice I have text, transform, and effects. And if I unfold effects, there's my Gaussian blur, right? So easy to start laying out keyframes either down here or up here. You'll see the little keyframe buttons are up here as well. So I could start off with maybe giving this a 300 blur, and I'm going to do it just horizontal. And I'm going to go ahead and just set a keyframe on that, on the blur dimensions and on the blurriness. I don't think I really actually needed on the blur dimensions the keyframe, but I did it anyway. And then I'm just going to come out to like maybe like 1 second. I'll kind of do it in like a half a second actually. Let's go down a little bit here. Yeah, let's go down to about like 30th. And oh, you know what? I actually have this. My composition is way longer than it needs to be. Let's go to my composition settings. Sorry, this was using my default last time. It was like a 35-minute video. So let's just make this whole thing 30 seconds long. It's like, what is going on with my time scale? There we go. Okay, so now we can go to a half a second. We'll go to about 15th of a, there we go. And I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit just so I can kind of see my timeline a little bit better. So 15 frames there out of the almost 30. I think we're at 29.97 frames per second. And let's go ahead and change this back down to 0. And right off the bat, I get a nice little fade. If I bring in my preview zone, bring in this bar here so it only repeats on that. Whoops, sorry, almost grabbed my dock there. And at the same time, I'm going to add an opacity shift in, which is something I'll often do. So I'll start at 0. And same thing, if I hold shift, I can line up right on that keyframe, bring it up to 100. And let's go ahead and play that. There we go. Nice little fade, soft in. If I make that go a little bit faster, we'll take it down here. And maybe I'll go ahead and grab these keyframes and right click on them and give them an easy ease, just to kind of smooth everything out. There we go. Nice little whoop, kind of comes in, snaps in off of a blur, right? And you know, if I want to increase that, I could always, let's see what it looks like vertically. That's kind of fun, a little snap in vertically. And if, you know, it's not enough, then just increase the value, and we'll come up here to 500. And a little snap-in blur action. And you know, this is not limited to just type. Any of these effects up there can be applied to any layer. So you can apply it to shapes that you bring in from Illustrator or that you make in After Effects. You can apply it to video. You can apply it to 3D objects. You can apply it to type. Anything you can think of in After Effects, you can apply these effects to. So, kind of cool. There's also a, you know, at any point I can disable that effect by clicking this little FX button. And then it's just going to go back to just a simple opacity shift. So I'm going to go ahead and fold up Gaussian Blur. And I'm going to go back to effects again and go down to the blur. And I'm going to do motion blur this time. So I feel like there's a directional blur. We kind of got a directional blur off of the Gaussian, but this should give me... Sorry, I'm just trying to see if there's a better one that I want to use. There's so many blurs in After Effects now. There's a camera lens, bilateral, cross blur, radial blur, vector blur, channel blur. So let's do this directional blur. It's been a minute since... Yeah, cool. So I can actually give it an angle that it's blurring in at. So if I'll just come out here so we can actually see it at 100%. And I'll give it like a little angle. And then let's give the blur length. So that's not quite enough. Let's give it like 400. That's fun. And then obviously I can shift this around. And I could even animate this direction, right, over time. So let's start here. And we'll go ahead and open up direction blur done in the timeline. We're going to give it a direction and a blur keyframe. And then I'm going to move those back to the beginning. And now I'm going to go ahead and change the direction just a little bit, and I'm going to bring the blur length down to 0. Let's see how that looks. Oh, that's kind of fun, a little snap and rotation in. Cool. So, you know, you can start to play with these in a lot of different ways. Obviously, if I come back to this keyframe, I could make it go even further, like 800. Let's see what happens if I like really make it rotate around. There we go. That's kind of fun. A little snap-in action that you can start to do with these effects. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the direction blur, and let's keep looking at effects. So if I come up to effects here, one of the things you're going to end up doing a lot in here is color correction, particularly on video and on any elements that have more than a solid color. So there's some really powerful stuff in here. You have levels just like you have in Photoshop. You have, so I use levels a lot if I just need to increase brightness and contrast and midtones. I also end up using Hue Saturation quite a bit. I mean, I can switch things right now if I want to change the hue. And what's cool is you can animate this over time. As you can see, there's a little stopwatch next to channel range. So again, under effects, now I have a Hue Saturation. So if I wanted to do something where I have my channel range start off one way and then bring it around. Actually, I'm going to have it start there, and then I'll rotate it and shift it a little bit. Now I have a color shift as it fades up, right? So if I turn my Gaussian blur back on with that, so now I have a blur from green to blue, which is kind of fun. So you can animate all of these different effects. You can make something come up and down. I could increase the saturation as well. On this is already a pretty saturated color, so that's not going to do a lot. But on video, on 3D elements that are more pixel-based, obviously you're going to get a lot of control over it. So let's fold these up. And you can see at any point, you know, I'm just disabling them with the effects button here, but you can also just delete them up here, either in the timeline or up above, however you need to do it if you don't want it anymore. There's so much more. There's all these like distortions and blurs. Let's see what Bulge does. So bulge is kind of fun. Some of these have a lot more control than others. So as I start to bulge this, you can see I can play around with the vertical radius, like where it's bulging from. I can stretch this out and give it kind of a, sorry, let me grab that bulge radius again. I lost that for a second there. Bear with me. Let's get the bulge back here. There we go. I like being able to just kind of drag that out. Whoop. See, now I'm just moving the type underneath it. I want to move this. There we go. Cool. So now I can get the full text inside of that bulge radius. And then I can play with like the bulge height, like how much it's bulging. And all of these, as you can see, you can animate them. So I can play with the taper. Actually, that's not controlling it as much, but I can play with the vertical radius as well, like how much it bulges out that way, or if we bring it inward. And I can animate all that over time as well. So much that you can work with. Let's go ahead and set a bulge center, height, and vertical radius, and then come out to here. And we'll bring these back down to 0. And we'll go ahead and turn that blur back on as well. Let's try that. That's kind of fun. Little snap in. Not quite. I think the blur might be throwing it off. It might be giving it a little too much because the blur is happening differently outside the radius. So we'd have to play with that one a little bit. And probably have to make the radius a little bit bigger as it kind of animates in. So anyway, we'll have to play around with the parameters on that. But there's so much more beyond bulge. So I'm just going to delete the bulge one there. We'll go back to effects. Really just play around in here and check things out. Some are for specific software, like this is for Cinema 4D. And like I said, some are more intense than others. There's like denoising ones. There's ones that bring noise in. You can make things grainy looking, or you can get rid of it. Dusts and scratches for like an old school kind of like film effect. There's just a lot in here to play with. Then there's all these stylized like brush strokes and emboss. These ones really are like Photoshop filters. So again, you might find a good use for something, but if I bring in like a mosaic effect, you can see what it's doing here. So I could take this down to like 3, or I could increase it to like 100. And it's giving kind of like a pixelate effect. There we go. I can make it look all 8-bit, which is kind of fun. And I could animate how that changes over time. Give that 200 by 200. Can play around with it. There's sharp colors that kind of get rid of some of the anti-aliasing. So anyway, so many fun effects that you can play with. So I'm going to stop on the effects. Go ahead and check them out. Try animating them. Get used to them. I'm going to go ahead and just delete these effects for right now. And now I'm going to show you over here on the right. We have these effects and presets. So I can click on that, and then you can see most of these effects are here as well in these kind of hierarchical lists. So again, if I wanted to come in and play around with blur, I could unfold. And then I can drag any of these blurs. Like if I want to put Gaussian blur on something, I can drag it on there and still apply that effect, right? But at the top, there are animation presets. And there's some really cool ones in here. There's ones for like backgrounds. There's these like behavioral ones that have like little wiggles and positions. And like if I throw a wiggle position on there and then show it to you over time, it makes it kind of wiggle over time. I don't know if you can see that, but it's slowly moving around. And there's all sorts of things you can play around with on that. There's speed and position and transformations. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. There's also like a wiggle on scale. It'll play with like its size over time. And you can speed those up or slow them down. There's a lot to play with on the behaviors. There's image control presets, like making things bloom and shift colors over time. There's image special effects, like a bad TV effect or an embossed effect, blah, blah, blah. Let's actually try that special effect. I'm curious if the bad TV will look good on... Oh yeah, cool. If I actually extend this out beyond just 20 frames, You can see it's got kind of like a little warping that it's doing, kind of like a little scan line effect going on. And we could speed that up or slow it down, all that fun stuff. All right, cool. Let's bring that back. But what I really want to show you today is the type effects, since we have text up, or the text effects. So there's some really fun ones in here that automatically throw keyframes down. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the opacity keyframes here, and we'll just see what happens. So if I unfold like 3D text and bring this over, you can see there's a ton of ones in here. So let's try like flutter out from the right. Oh, actually, I still have that bad TV on there. Let me get rid of that. Wave warp, blur buck. Oh boy, that put a whole bunch in there, didn't it? Let's get rid of those. Okay, cool. That was like a combination of effects to create the bad TV. So let's go ahead and drag that on. And you're going to see we get this cool like 3D, and this is actually playing with some of like After Effects 3D elements that it can do over time. Not quite enough time on that one, so let's go ahead and bring it out to see. Looks like they're doing 2 full seconds here to do this effect. So if we bring under text here, you can see it's actually added 2 Animator Tabs, and inside of those are some keyframes. So let's go ahead and play that out. And it's doing this kind of cool 3D flip and fold and fade effect, all built in. Let's see it in real time now. There we go. Kind of a nice 3D cascade. And so you can see how it's playing with it. It gives you all the settings, and then you could change it and adapt it however you want. I can make it go faster or slower, etc., etc. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to try another one. So instead of the 3D text effects, let's do like an animate in effect. And there's all these different ones in here. Let's do the decoder fade in. And if I unfold Animator, you can just, like I said, get a really good idea of kind of how they're making these things happen over time. So that's not long enough. Let's zoom out and see. So it looks like this one's about 3 seconds long. So we'll go ahead and bring out the preview range to get the whole thing. So this is this little decoder, kind of like rolls out the letters one by one. Nice effect. Could always speed it up by moving those keyframes in on the range selector. So if I wanted this to happen faster. There we go. So let's keep going. Let's do a random fade up. Looks like this one goes out to about a little over a second. So this gives you kind of that random fade up of all the different letters in your name or in the words that you're working with, the characters or text. Get rid of that one. There's just so much to play with in here, and like I said, this is really nice because it's a preset that just gives you a starting point as you're getting used to using the animator options on type. Let's do a twirl on each line. Looks like this one goes all the way out to a little bit past 3 seconds. Whoa. You know, some are pretty heavy duty, but that's still kind of fun. Like the twirl out, you know. You might have something that fits. I could see like a little tornado or this or that kind of thing that you're talking about in an infographic. Obviously, some of these are kind of long, so you're going to have to play with them. But that's just animate in. Then there's animate out. There's blur effects. Let's try this one. That's the jiggy. Whoop. Sorry. Let me get rid of that. There we go. Let's try jiggy on that. Well, that's kind of fun. So that's using an expression. It's the jiggy animator here that's just making it kind of like pulse and fade over time. If I actually go under there, there's blur, and then you're going to see there's actually an expression. So expressions are the coding. You can write these little expression coding snippets. So this is using the wiggler, and it's setting like duration and amount and all of that fun stuff of how much it's blurring and the randomness of the blur and all that fun bits and pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Let's see. Let's try evaporate. Looks like this one goes out to about the 2 second mark. Ooh. Oh, that's a nice one. So cool motion graphics elements that we're working with. And they just evaporate and fade and blur and scale all at the same time. So if we bring that in, you'll see that there's a keyframe here under the range selector. And then there's playing with some advanced stuff, but also doing a blur, an opacity, and a scale all at the same time. All right, hopefully that gives you an idea of some new places to explore. Again, that was the animation presets for text, but know that like a lot of these other ones can be applied to any shape, any element that you're bringing in. So you can do all these different transitions. There's so much fun stuff here in the effects and presets. So please check it out. And as always, thanks for tuning in, and reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.